Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, October 31st, 2024, which the cool kids call Halloween. And on the show today, we are going to discuss rodents in the garden, growing a favorite snack, and death, because it's, tis the season. So let's do it. Halloween always marks kind of a lot of endings for us on our farm. It's the end of our main growing season here. Our market always shut down around Halloween. The end of the kids' soccer season is also right around Halloween every year. The end of the year tournament's coming up this weekend. It's the end of the heavy growing season in the gardens and the start of heavy reflection. But that's also why I love me some November. It's still light out for long enough and warm enough outside that I can get a bunch of stuff done without the crunch of market or production because, stuff just kind of hangs out all month. Now, I know a lot of folks will still go pretty hard all the way through and finish their growing seasons roughly in Thanksgiving time, which is often a pretty big farmers market week. So for some of you, this is a busy month, and for others of you, it is an almost restful month. And for those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, things are just getting started down there. So best of luck to you all. We will be eating popcorn and enjoying your Instagram feeds. In fact, I kind of want to talk for a minute about growing popcorn, which seems like an appropriate crop to ramble about on Halloween, and what I've learned in the last few years of really trying to produce more of it. First, popcorn is a snack that our kids enjoy a lot, that we can grow in our fields, and I love that. I'm sure they'd prefer to grow like a larbar tree or something, but they'll accept the popcorn plants. Plus, for all the bad press that monoculture corn gets, often deservedly so, I absolutely love growing corn in all of its forms. Dent corns, popcorns, sweet corns, all of it. I talked the other day about my favorite crops to harvest, which corn is sort of high up there, but in terms of crops I flat out enjoy from start to finish, corn is definitely in the top 5, if not the top 3. I love how lush and green it gets. I love how loaded the tassels become with pollinators. I love the verticality of it when so much of our gardens are flat. I love the shade that verticality provides as well. It's just a fun crop. One bed of popcorn, which for us is around 150 plants, gives us more than enough popcorn for the year and a little extra to sell, generally. I have long suspected that with the right packaging, popcorn would be a good product for farmers, especially around the holiday markets, but also early in the season when variety is low. The popcorn is still good to sell from the winter all the way through the spring. Last year, we grew 5 beds, which was significantly too much, and I still have a lot of that left over that I've been using as cover crop. Notably, popcorn is a very slow plant to grow and not a great cover crop, but doesn't hurt anything to throw it into summer sown cover crop mixes. In fact, I threw in some into our winter killed field peas this year, which the YouTube crowd can probably see is dead amongst the thriving peas, but added a little something. But anyway, the reason we grew those 5 beds was to test a few different varieties, and ultimately the popcorn we've landed on that we like the most so far is still just the boring old, I think it's called robust number something from Johnny's. All the varieties we've tried are good and they pop fine, and I like exploring all the different textures of the pop, but some pop small and some stay extra crunchy and some are both. I got really excited about black popcorn last year, but I didn't love the one we tried. Also, colored popcorns obviously still pop white, but the black shell gives them a burnt look when they pop, which I knew, but is kind of the same sort of letdown as how purple beans and red okra and that sort of stuff turn green when you cook them. I don't love that because it feels like I'm tricking the customer when I sell it to them. It looks beautiful, but it just pops like regular white popcorn that looks a little burnt. Now, last year was a bit of a bizarre growing season for that popcorn. I'm not giving up on those or any other varieties out there that maybe are a little bit interesting and maybe just need a little bit more TLC. And by TLC, I just mean more rain than we got in the middle of the summer last year. But I'd really like to find a good heirloom popcorn or one open pollinated popcorn I could save seed on. So let me know if you have your favorites or any that you really like that the pop is really nice. I've started popcorn in both trays, soil blocks, and wind strips, as well as directly sown it. Because it's more or less a crop for the family, I have not collected any sort of data to see which performs better, starting it in trays versus sowing it. I suspect that sowing it is better overall, just because that's how almost all crops work. But next year, that's going to be on my list of trials to really figure that out. I grow corn every year from starts in the greenhouse because I don't like direct seeding slow growing crops because, like most farmers, it takes up space for far too long when I could just grow a whole round of radishes in that same bed while the corn waits on deck in the greenhouse. But when you grow it from starts, you have to be very careful with the taproot and plant them when they are still quite young, like just a few inches tall. The advantage to transplanting is that you get fewer crow issues. And by crow, that's not like a disease or anything. It's just literally crows who come through and just pick out the kernels because it's nice and sweet right after it germs. But obviously, that is not at all scalable. I mean, transplanting like that. Hand transplanting thousands of tender young popcorns is not an option for most of us. Instead, if you want to grow more, I like soaking the seed in some sort of compost tea to prime it overnight, then sowing it into the bed, and then finally covering that bed with row cover until the plants are big enough that the crows / birds / whatever else won't devastate them. More on those trials in the spring, which, albeit almost November right now, somehow already feels eerily close by. Spooky. Well played, Halloween. Anyway, up next, we deal with some rodents. BRB.
Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out.
If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast or any of our podcasts and want to support them, you can do so at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. If you've become a regular watcher or listener, hopefully the show provides at least $2 or $5 or whatever worth of value to your life every month. Joining the Patreon page is a great way to show it. Plus, I will absolutely mangle your name at the end of the show, which is a delicacy in some cultures. Today's question comes from Patreon member Kyle Putnam, who writes, ROUSs, or rodents of not unusual size. A good Princess Bride reference there. I've been losing a battle with a field mouse, not a rat, as far as I can tell. It is smarter than me. As an example, it found a screw from our construction site and jammed it into a trap to trigger it. We've gone about 23 rounds and I've lost every one. Effective rodent control in a large garden, ? First, thank you for the question. Without knowing the extent of the damage here, Kyle, or what that damage looks like, let's talk about rats and mice in the garden because unfortunately, and I could be totally wrong here, but that sounds more like a rat or an elf. And I'm going to guess elves are still not a thing. First, it is almost impossible to keep mice entirely out of a garden. Even if you find an effective strategy, they will adapt. The goal is to limit the damage and limit the populations and make the situation inhospitable. On our farm, for that, the first thing we do is we have a cat. Her name is Charlie. She's almost 11 years old. She rules and she brings us a mouse nearly every day. Yes, occasionally we find she has used the mulch for the bathroom. Animals are going to do that whether they're domesticated or not. So that's when you would flag that area and not harvest around it for food safety. Typically, though, that is not a huge problem. Animals are not trying to contend with a bunch of vegetation to use the restroom. They are typically looking for an empty pile of mulch, like the site of an old compost pile or wood chip pile that resembles a primitive litter box. To do their business. So effectively, that's just less of an issue than I think people assume it's going to be. Also, habitat for birds of prey and snakes, if you are like us, where the snakes are largely good guys, like black snakes and garter snakes and those sorts of things. The majority of the mouse damage you're going to receive is on seedlings, but rarely in the field, only because mice hate being out in the open for fear of predation. The greenhouse is where mice can do some serious damage, though. Walking tray to tray and eating, or sometimes just, mercilessly killing all of the tiny seedlings that you have. You have not lived until you've found 10 meticulously labeled trays of winter squash for the season systematically degermed by a mouse. It's super fun. It's a hoot. Occasionally, I've found that mice will dig around in the potting soil if it contains like a fish fertilizer or blood meal of some sort, but rats are way worse about that. They will absolutely devastate a tray to eat all of the sweet germinating seeds and dig around for, goofs. So effectively, trays must be on rodent-proof tables, especially when young and germinating. A regular card table works pretty well for this just because it's got those metal legs, but don't underestimate the intelligence of rats. They are really, really smart creatures. And if there is a way to get onto that table and they're bored or curious, they will figure it out. There was a recent episode of This American Life about rats that you should listen to for context and just general enjoyment because it's a great show. But fair warning that you may end up wanting a rat as a pet and a friend. And as a toothbrush, that'll make sense once you listen to the episode. Unfortunately, rats are not great in the garden. They can burrow underground and nibble on plant roots and sweet potatoes and such. Not to mention they can potentially spread diseases. They are also annoyingly cute, and they no doubt use that to their advantage. And they will adapt to whatever you throw at them. Setting off a trap with a screw, to me, sounds like exactly what a rat would do to a trap. Obviously, with farms who do their own compost, rats can find their way to your farm if the compost is accessible. They love themselves a fresh compost pile. For rat control, I will post a link to an electric trap that we've used in the past and had a lot of success with. There are also a few designs for bucket traps you can look at online. Those aren't my favorite because drowning something through exhaustion feels a bit inhumane in my opinion, but those options do exist. There are also animals like rat terriers and Jack Russells you could employ that I know. There are compost farms who keep those dogs around just for that purpose. Arizona Worm Farm, I think, talked about this, about rats being one of their biggest predators for worms and kept dogs around for them. And I'll post a link to the video we did with them about composting and where they talk about that. The Composter podcast recently had Domingo Morales of Compost Power, New York City, on there where they discuss rats, which is obviously a big deal there. Again, I'll link that one as well. If you're seeing damage in the field, I'm going to guess it's not a mouse. It's not impossible, but just a little bit less common in the fields in my experience. But obviously maybe the mice where you are a little bit more ambitious than the mice where we are. Rats are more likely to be brazen enough to stand out in a field and feast. Mice know cats and birds are keen to snag them. Rats, by contrast, know that very little wants to mess with a rat. Great cooks, though. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, Kyle, and Patreon members, please keep the great questions coming. When we come back, let's honor Halloween and talk some good old-fashioned death. Be right back.
Hey everyone, this is Clara Coleman, and I just wanted to pop in here real quick and say that if you're enjoying this show, you may also enjoy my own show, the Winter Growers Podcast. I interview growers from all over the world about how they produce year-round, especially through the winter months. We talk about the infrastructure, the mental and physical challenges, the tips and tricks, and I even include a thought-provoking lightning round of questions at the end of each conversation. You can subscribe to the Winter Growers Podcast wherever you get podcasts, or subscribe to the No-Till Growers Network on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for letting me jump in, and I look forward to seeing you there. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
So this week I learned a new term thanks to an article I read in the New York Times called What Ants and Orcas Can Teach Us About Death, which, if you ever want me to click on something, that's my clickbait. Anyway, the term that I learned this week is comparative thanatology, the study of animals' relationship with death. That article is kind of a short interview, but brings up a few things that are interesting in terms of animals' relationship to death. For instance, the interviewee, Dr. Susanna Monso, which everyone knows we love the name Susan in all of its forms around here, but she breaks down 3 elements of death and how animals respond to it. On the basic level is how certain animals are able to recognize death to begin with. She uses the example of ants who will pull corpses from their colonies and take them outside, but also how it's a response to the presence of certain chemicals such as oleic acid, which, fun fact, is the official fatty acid of soccer fans, and how when researchers apply oleic acid to an ant, the other ants will simply take the ant outside and treat it like it's dead. I should say that, to me, a chemical that makes others think you're dead sounds like a great plot to a horror movie or a Jose Saramago novel. Then, just beyond recognizing death is understanding death, that something that was once doing stuff can no longer be doing stuff. A prime example of this is the possum's ability to play dead. If animals, and in particular predators, did not understand death at all, they would be more likely to continue pursuing the possum even though it's just laying there like a dweeb. Last, of course, is the biggie to me, and that's the question of, do animals mourn the dead? And there are famous, somewhat viral examples like dolphins and whales carrying their dead calves around. A form of grief is considered a possibility, a possible explanation for this, though the mental mechanisms behind that response are not that well understood from what I can tell as a dude who literally discovered this field of study on like Tuesday. I know I said that was the last one, but there is one sort of element that they didn't really touch on in that article, but I naturally found myself in a bit of a rabbit hole. But anyway, the other thing about this sort of idea is memory. Studies on elephants demonstrated that when researchers played the calls of deceased elephants to their relatives, the elephants responded with contact calls 3 to 23 months after the death of that elephant. They did not do the same in control trials where unfamiliar elephants' calls were played. That isn't to say they were mourning necessarily, but that they remembered that elephant or at least had a reaction to its calls. All of this is very fascinating. And of course, as the article points out, and science will always point out, it is easy to and also risky to over-anthropomorphize or compare animal actions and emotions to humans too much, but it is also occasionally unhelpful to avoid the comparisons altogether. I believe it is hard to see the full beauty of a world we feel completely unbound from. I think it's hard to take care of it, grow it, improve it, and empathize with it. So no, animals may not treat death exactly like we do, but also maybe sometimes they do, and maybe sometimes it's more interesting. Maybe sometimes they do it in a completely different way. Or maybe we over-intellectualize what we do and under-intellectualize what they do. All of which is extraordinary because nature is fascinating. Anyway, there are a near countless number of stories about animals and grief and death, including everything from pets to orcas, but I am going to leave it there for now. Huge shout out to Willie Breeding for the theme music and our team at No-Till Growers for their support. Also, I want to give an enormous shout out to Rimmel Greenhouses for being the first show sponsor of Growers Daily. What I love about these guys is that they just want to support our work and believe in what we're doing and believe in small farmers. And so I hope if you are in the market for a new tunnel, you will at least get in touch with them at rimmelgreenhouses.com. Really appreciate them. Otherwise, if you'd like to support our work or get your questions vaguely answered on the show, or just show us some support for all the work this show takes, which is a lot, join up over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of October, we'll shout you out on the show. So big shout outs today to Tracy Coleman, Carolina Gray. I think it's Carolina. It's a cool name. It's a tricky name. You want to say Carolina or Carolina, but I'm pretty sure that's Carlina. Christy Dolan, Stacy Moorman. Oh, that's another good one. It's tricky. Jesse Turrets and Fuller Gardens. This is a good novel. This one to me is like, so Stacy, Christy, Jesse, and Tracy and Carlina they all went to Creighton. And they graduated together and they all went on to do their own careers. But ultimately, they decided to start like a little community farming project. And I think what ultimately happened was, they went through all the trials and tribulations of trying to start like a collaborative farming effort. And then that's when somebody came with the chemicals that made people think people were dead, and then they had to save the day, and it was really heroic stuff. The name of that novel is Fuller Gardeners. Yep. All right. See you all tomorrow. Happy Halloween. Bye.